Hello, welcome to Stories for Wonderful Children, the podcast where I share the recordings of the improvised bedtime stories I've told my children over the years. I'm Dan Wendelin, your host and storyteller. Today's story was told in August of 2008, and it's the last of the first series of Ea and Dak stories. If you've enjoyed these stories, drop me an email and let me know, or send me a picture of what you think Ea and Dak look like. I hope you enjoy this last story about them. Shan, Dak, and Ea started off bright and early the next morning. When Dak and Ea's parents had gone to the tropical island, it had taken them 3 weeks of travel by ship to reach it. But Shan and Dak and Ea were not traveling by ship. They were traveling by storm wind. So they flew through most of the morning and stopped for lunch. They had brought a lunch basket with them that had some fruit in it. So they had fruit for lunch, along with some bread and some cheese. And then they flew back into the air and flew for most of the afternoon before Shan brought them down for a potty break, because it just wouldn't do to just go to the potty up in the air. You'd never know who you'd hit. So they thought it best if they came down to the ground. And after their potty break, they all got a quick drink of water, and they flew on, now over the ocean, for the rest of the afternoon into the early evening. And just as the sun was setting, they saw the island in the distance, and they approached rapidly. It was good that they had seen it before the sun was entirely set, because there were very few lights on the island. There were just a few torches and a few fires, but it wasn't like a city would be. It was mostly uninhabited, except for one village on the eastern side. They landed next to that village on the beach, and they walked into that village. Most of the people there were around one of the fires, and they were singing and dancing. Ea and Dak saw their mother and father and ran over to them, gave them a big hug. And then they all sat around the fire and spent the evening telling stories. And boy, did Ea have a lot of stories to tell. She had told everything that had happened since her parents had left. And her father shook his head and he said, that Lord Abner, I should have known, but I didn't realize he was so greedy and so treacherous. And then Shan got introduced to Ea's mother and father, and they thanked him for all his help, for their kingdom and all his help for their son and daughter. And by the time they had finished catching up on all these stories, it was late at night, and the fire was burned down to just a few glowing embers. And so,
what are embers?
Embers are just sort of little tiny sticks of kind of hot glowing wood that are left after wood has mostly been burned up in a fire. Anyway, Ea's parents invited them back to their house to sleep the night. They all did. They all each had a straw mat, which at first they thought was going to be terribly uncomfortable compared to the soft beds they were used to. But they discovered that the straw mats were surprisingly comfortable. So they slept the night through on them. When they woke up in the morning, Ea saw that Dak and Shan were already up outside. She went out to find them, and she saw them off some distance from the village, and they appeared to be knocking coconuts out of trees. Shan was doing it by sort of creating a little tornado of wind that just sucked the coconut off the tree down to the ground. And
how's Dak doing?
Dak had out a knife, and he was shimmying up the coconut tree. And he was...
What does shimmy mean?
Shimmy is when you climb something but there aren't any branches to hold on to. There's just the trunk, so you have to just hold on tight to the trunk with your arms and legs. And when he got to the top of the tree, close to the coconuts, he would throw his knife and knock the coconut out of the tree. They already had a bunch of coconuts, and so when they saw Ea, they called her over and they gave her an armful of coconuts, and they each took an armful of coconuts themselves, and they took them back to the village, where they all worked together to split them open. For breakfast, they had coconut to eat and coconut milk to drink. And over breakfast, Ea told her parents about how she had invited Shan to come be court magician. And Shan told them about how he wanted permission to date their daughter, Ea. And Ea's mother and father agreed to that. They said that that was fine. And then they asked if Shan and Dak and Ea could spend the day or whether they had to get right back to the kingdom. And then Ea told them that there was no longer one Lord Chamberlain, that there was a Lord Judge and a Lord Guardian and a Lord Treasurer, and that they would do an excellent job. They agreed that they would stay for the day and they would explore the island together. So they all went a walk. This island was small enough you could pretty much walk around the whole thing and get back to where you started before the sun set. Well, they were about halfway around when Ea noticed a particularly pretty waterfall. And so they decided they were going to go explore the waterfall. Well, when they went up to the waterfall, they walked up to it, and Ea said, well, that's curious. And she walked over to look closer, and then she walked up to the waterfall, and then she disappeared. And they waited a minute, and they didn't see her, and they started yelling, Ea! Ea! And one by one they walked up to the waterfall, and each one of them disappeared. And then the last one to go in was Shan. He walked up, and he walked up to the waterfall, and he walked through the waterfall, and he found himself in a cave behind the waterfall. And everyone else was there too. They were looking back into the cave. The cave appeared to be fairly deep, but it was too dark to go too much further. So Shan held up his hand and summoned a little ball of lightning. And the ball just sort of floated there above his hand. And then they could see enough to walk on back into the cave. And they were walking on back, and Ea said, oh, how pretty. And she reached down and she picked up a rather peculiar sort of teal and turquoise blue stone. And as she picked it up into her hand, all of a sudden she said, oh, I feel sort of funny. And she sat down suddenly, and then for just a second she sort of fell over and her eyes closed, and then they popped back open, and she sat up and said, that was so strange. She said, I feel funny. I think I need to go back and rest. So after that they all came out from the cave, and Shan walked Ea back to the village while Dak and his parents went the rest of the way around the island. And Shan asked her, are you alright, Ea? And she said, well, I don't know. I feel sort of woozy. I think I need to take a nap. And so she laid down to take a nap. And she woke up from the nap about a half hour later, and she got out to talk to Shan. And Shan said, how'd you do that? And Ea said, what? And Shan said, your nails. And Ea looked down, and her fingernails had changed color. Now her fingernails were that same turquoise teal blue that the stone she had picked up had been. And she said, I didn't do anything. I don't know what's going on. Now Shan's magic sense was tingling. I told you before that one of the things that a mage learns first is to sense the presence of magic. And he sensed the presence of magic here. And he said, well, something magical's going on here, but I don't know what it is. And she said, well, me either, but I'm not going to worry about it. I feel better than I did before my nap. Let's go play on the beach. And they walked down to the beach, and they walked out into the water. And they had walked some distance out in the water when they saw a shark in the water swimming towards them very rapidly. They were in pretty shallow water, but they were a little worried they weren't going to be able to get back to shore before the shark caught up with them. And the shark started to get pretty close, and Shan got ready to summon his magic to protect himself. And Ea said, go away, shoo! And when she said that, the shark just made a hairpin turn and swam directly away from them. Well, she said, That was peculiar. Said Shan. Come here, Ea. And they walked out of the water up onto the beach. Shan looked around a minute until he saw a bird perched on a tree near the beach. He said, Ea, ask that bird to come perch on your shoulder. So Ea said, all right. Bird, come sit on my shoulder, please. And as soon as she said it, the bird flew down and perched on her shoulder. Whoa, said Shan. You've somehow acquired the ability to talk to animals. I have, said Ea. Could you ever do this before, said Shan. Oh, definitely not, said Ea. It must have had something to do with that stone in the cave. Said Shan. Well, this is certainly going to be interesting. I wonder whether you could take some time off from the kingdom to go to the magic academy that I went to learn how to use your magical power. I really don't think I can, said Ea. I think that you'll just have to teach me. I'm a storm mage. Well, you're also now the royal magician. My parents said it was fine, so when we get back, you have to teach me what you know about magic. All right, said Shan. Well, I guess that'll be just our adventures we have together. Great, said Ea. And about that time they saw her parents and Dak walking down the beach towards them, and they all got out fishing poles and went fishing, and they had some fish for dinner, and then they had some pineapple for dinner, and then they went to sleep. And the next morning they flew back to the kingdom.
Thanks for listening to Stories for Wonderful Children. I created today's story, but questions and witty commentary were supplied by my children. The music was created by Brandon Thompson. Your reviews and personal recommendations are the main way that new listeners find the show, so thank you for spreading the word. I'd love to hear your feedback, so feel free to get in touch via email or social media, which are listed in the show notes. Until next time, I'm Dan Wendelin, reminding you to tell someone you love a story.